Hi, I'm Paul Roberts, and this is Conscious Counseling 101, and I think this is going to be the third and the final in the New Testament series. I didn't know how far I was going to go with this, but I'm going to go ahead and stop here because Paul said a few things that really made me think about the whole context of this and why what he does is something totally different that goes off in another way. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad way or a good way, but I want to bring a few things to your attention here so that we can have some context here in comparison to what Jesus' teachings tell us. Because even Paul says, don't listen to him or other teachers, but listen to Jesus. Let's start off with 1 Corinthians 11:1. Be ye imitators of me, even as I also am of Christ. Well, he may be of Christ, and he may have some things to say, but it's very important that we realize right off the bat that Jesus' teachings that are recorded in the Gospels can be understood by children, by simple fishermen and farmers. But Paul's teachings, I got to be honest, I'm not going to go in and become a biblical scholar on them in order to have this short little 3 series of things on the New Testament here be conveyed to you in any other light. Because if I can't get it, just like those fishermen and farmers and children, then it's either a higher level teaching or it's something completely different, and I'm not going to make a judgment on that. However, I'm going to let Paul do it in his own words. So let's go over to 1 Corinthians 8:2. It's very important. And my dad had asked me recently where I came up with the Conscious Counseling 101 philosophy of I don't know anything for certain. It's faith-based, but really I just told him, well, because you don't. If you're truly honest with yourself, no one really knows anything for certain. When people quell themselves. But I find it interesting. I don't know if this is just like from a child I remembered this or something, or if I just put it together in my mind, but conscious counseling came about in the last 15 years or so based on things that I was able to just sit there and draw upon within my pool of ideas. I didn't go looking for it. But let's look at 1 Corinthians 8:2. I had it asked of me how I came up with the I don't know anything philosophy. Well, this is what I think is great about finishing this series up here. We talk about Paul, and in his own words, and if any man think that he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing, yet as he ought to know. So as soon as you try to lock something down and you go towards certainty and away from faith and away from Jesus' teachings and the separation between the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of earth and the parables he tries to show us about the correlation, as soon as you try to lock something into how we can judge something when Jesus warned us the judgment of another is one of the worst things we can do, as soon as you try to lock something in, this is where I say Paul goes astray. He gives us tools and implements that help us to narrowly define what is acceptable in this plane of existence that we're in here. And what has man done with that? Use those tools to judge. I'm going to go to, there's a lot of things we could talk about here, but I'm going to go to one of the big ones right now. 1 Corinthians 11:15. If a woman have long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given her for a covering. 1 Corinthians 11:7. For a man indeed ought not to have his head veiled, for as much as he is the image and glory of God. But a woman is the glory of man. Okay. Forget about the sexism and stuff like that, because we can give God the benefit of the doubt that he has various roles for people. One of the reasons I'm talking to you about this now is my wife and I went to our church to find God's inspiration and Jesus' message for our guidance in our marriage counseling. And our pastor pulled out a book of a man that very much succumbed to these kinds of ideas. And I just about lost my wife because she didn't want anything to do with that, and she didn't want to be married to me. And I was the man that found a treasure in the field and went and sold everything I had and bought that field and wanted to marry this person. So I said, okay, you know what, I'm going to give up myself. I'm going to decide that I'm going to follow the one thing we can agree on, Jesus' teachings, and make that be the doctrine for our life. And use that to govern one another and help teach one another and help bring our children into this world. Thank goodness I didn't say it about Paul's teaching, because not only are Paul's teachings biased, sexist, limiting, but they give us ability to do all this in the physical realm and cause judgment. Get things really wrong from Jesus' simple teachings that everyone, even a child, could understand. Now, I'm not saying it's Paul's intent to not do the will of God. I'm not saying it's Paul's intent to do something other than present Jesus' teachings. I'm not saying he's even wrong. I'm saying your standard person with a heart that isn't pure, following Jesus and coming to know him by keeping his commands, may stumble on these things. They're like, to the layperson, they're like Shakespeare or poetry or abstract art that's far-fetched and hard to relate to. I would like to say that as my considered opinion, and I mean long considered opinion, that it's because of the work of Paul and some others after Jesus, after the Gospels, that we've gotten to the state we're at now in this day and age, as messed up as it is, once again stumbling over ourselves in society. Now, your Christian will say, well, that's because of sin. They stumble because they're not following God. Well, you know what? We have the Holy Spirit, but we also have the Word. If we're corrupting the Word, even those that are in the Word, in any way, making it harder for those to come, then we're allowing them to stumble. Now, what do? I say, okay, I'm not going to put this down. I'm not going to say, hey, you know, it's not of God. I'm going to say, just like Paul says, don't follow my teachings or any others. Follow the teachings of Jesus. He says this. He also says he doesn't know anything. And as soon as a man thinks he should know something, he doesn't yet know as he ought to know. Now, let's go to one more verse like that. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 4:4. I judge not my own self, for I know nothing against myself, yet I am not hereby justified, but he that judgeth me is in the Lord. That's great. That's wonderful. Okay. If you say those words, Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Lock yourself down, Paul. Now, we need to see that Paul has to be locked down by his words, or he's not of Jesus. Because Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. If he says that he knows nothing, you've got to understand that he must know nothing. If he says, I judge not my own self, for I know nothing against myself, yet I am not hereby justified, but he that judgeth me is in the Lord, then all people should only be judged by he that is in the Lord. So all these words that Paul uses, all these crazy, all over the board things that we have a hard time following in the way that it was so simple that Jesus could be followed easily, even if you take it upon yourself to understand what all that means, and even if you take it upon yourself to say, this is all holy of God and everything, you still have to say, many people can't relate to it in the same way. But he's given us an escape clause. He has given us an escape clause. He's admitted he doesn't know. He's admitted that he cannot be judged but by God. We can't trip up on his stumbling blocks and judge our fellow man, or we're not taking that escape clause he gave us and going away where we can't judge. We're being bogged down by his words over and above Jesus' words, and it's making us entrapped or stumbling. This is my point, and I've talked about these stumbling blocks for 20 years now. Let's look at that same verse, but in I have the 1611 and the 1881 King James here. Let's look at it in the other one, 1611. For I know nothing by myself, yet I am not hereby justified. But he that judgeth me is the Lord. That's great. And if that's the case, and we're all truthful and honest to one another and ourselves, that's what will happen to all of us. My problem with Paul and his teachings are that they can create a world where everything's about, look at that, look at him, look at how they do that. They're doing something wrong, I'm doing something right. I am boasting that I have it all together. I'm writing letters telling you what you're doing wrong, but look at me, use me, imitate me. All that sets up huge amounts of judgment in our world today. And I say to you, take a look around at the news. Take a look around at what's happening. We are living anything but the simple teachings that Jesus gave us. We're all messed up. And you can say, well, that's because you don't follow or read or study or go to God in prayer. No, it's literally what the doctrine says as you become a Christian and you go on with these words. If you don't stick to Jesus' teachings, you literally are going to go down any conceivable path. Now, Paul warns you about it. He says, don't follow my teachings or this next brother's teachings or this next brother's teachings over and above Jesus. He warns you about it. So if he's going to warn you about it, and yet his teachings are so narrow and black and white, then what final conclusion can you make that these words are a purifying way to understand what might be wrong that others are following and getting wrong and implementing on others, but that this is to help us not be a mirror of Paul, but to use this to cleanse and purify what is wrong with us that isn't imitating Jesus' teachings and words. So in other words, these tools, as much as some people like to look at them as these are the next steps in the New Testament on your Christian progress. Yes, but they're not for you to do what they say. They're for you to see how they differ from Jesus and use that to strengthen your muscles of Jesus' teachings and understandings, which can never be challenged. So he puts these things out for you to purify yourself and become stronger in your faith. What many people have done is just follow them. This is what I have against Paul, my namesake. But it's not against Paul. It's about your illegitimate way to see Paul. The person that's not able to see Paul, for even as he asks, not to be, that he doesn't know anything, and that he isn't to be put above Jesus, even though he says to be imitated. That's a tough one. The bottom line is, his tools, if they're used as tools to find a closer connection to Jesus' words, are beneficial. But if they're tripped up on, and they could cause all kinds of problems for a Christ follower, or Christian, I should say. A Christ follower, I don't like to use the word Christian because a Christ follower can't become anything other than a Christ follower. These things cannot make him anything but a Christ follower. So using these things help him become a better Christ follower. But if you're not a Christ follower, or you're a Christian or something beyond a Christ follower, these things can lead you astray down another road, down a road towards judgment of others, and eventually stumbling up so that you receive judgment of yourself. And this is what this 3-part lesson of the New Testament and Paul going outside the Gospels of Jesus' teachings is hopefully to help do. And I must say I was inspired to do this because for many years I've known my father puts a lot of his input structure from what man gives rather than just the word itself. And I've talked to him many times to be aware of that, conscious of that, and try to do something about it to counteract it. But this last year of my life, even though we've reconciled things and we have no harsh feelings, and we let each other live, and we give each other our love and our blessing. My brother, when I was using Jesus' teachings on their own to communicate with him for a year, just didn't understand what I was saying. And my cousin, in the examples I was giving using these teachings, didn't understand. And I had to find out why they didn't understand the simplicity of Jesus' teachings, stated straight. And it's because they're already going down some of these other roads. They don't realize it, but they're following the ideas of men that are doing it, and they're becoming jumbled and confused. They've left the simplicity, and they've gone down these other tangents. If they don't get back to the simplicity and the understanding of Jesus' words, they're going to have a really hard time. They're already not able to relate to brother. That's bad. This is what inspired me to look closer at Paul's teachings and find out what was it that was causing this. Let's look at Corinthians 3:6. Part of my helping others is to become consciously heightened, but not consciously out there somewhere like some kind of hippie, crazy, new age thinker, but consciously heightened through the light of Jesus' teachings so that I can, as a servant, provide tools and help to cause the ability for another person to see what I'm seeing, but equate it with Jesus and not take it away from there, but maybe pull them in a little bit from where they are and put them back on the straight and narrow. This is part of my purpose, and this is why I've done this study, because something was eating at me. I needed to know how these people were going off on all these different ways. Why are all these divisions in church and between brothers? I don't want to put it all on Paul as a scapegoat, but he's a big one. Now, he's not doing anything necessarily wrong, but some people aren't qualified to understand what he's doing, and they get trapped in it. And that's what I'm worried about. That's what I'm concerned about. And that's what I've learned in my re-looking at Paul. I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. Again, if you see these things for what they are, God will give the increase. But it's dangerous. It's like when you go into karate and you get up to the black belt levels. You make smaller gains. But if you watch the Karate Kid series, if you go to the Cobra Kai, that's totally the antithesis of the Mr. Miyagi-Do teaching, that it's karate is for self-defense only and for honorable intentions. And the other one's all about, let's see how we can, beat up on these people that need beaten up on. If you use Paul's teachings as the way they were meant by God or Jesus' follower, you can gain all this out of it. Okay? You can get, God gave the increase after Paul planted and Apollos watered. Okay? You can get the increase. But if you don't do what I'm saying about going to Jesus' teachings as the cornerstone, as the guidance for these things, you can get the Cobra Kai effect. You could go off to where it's all about animosity and pointing your finger at everybody else, and the whole time you feel this as a Christian, that you're justified. This is how you, unbeknownst of how it came about, will one day be placed outside the gate where there's wailing and gnashing of teeth, and you'll say, but Lord, I followed all these things. And Jesus will say, I never knew you. But you were like wolves in sheep's clothing, and that's why I placed you outside of the gate. This is how the Christian today can lose their way based on the actual words of people that are written down in the New Testament, rather than, they fell into sin, they fell into earthly temptations, they did this and this. Why do you even say those things? Because he teaches you to point. He teaches you to lift yourself up by pushing others down, which is the opposite of what Jesus wants you to do. You're not to judge, but he teaches you. He gives you the tools to point. And that becomes an MO. This becomes what you are about. And you're in the church. You're in that place that should not have this. And you're becoming about this, and you're helping others. You're teaching others to become about this. This is what's making our world the way that it is, not just the fleshly sins and the lost way of others that are out there somewhere. No, it's right here. You guys who call yourself Christians, call yourself in the church, if you don't understand Jesus' teachings, aren't applying it to the whole, you are vulnerable to falling on these stumbling blocks. And they're only stumbling blocks if you're not right with the Lord, if you're not following Jesus' teachings and understanding. They're not stumbling blocks if they're divinely used to sort out. See, when I say something's a stumbling block, or I say there's corruption in the church, it's not necessarily a bad thing. God can use a man's failures, or a tendency to run towards judgment, or a tendency to be apathetic, or a tendency to call himself holier than thou, and I'm a Christian and all, without actually being a Christ follower and understanding what they're saying. He can use those things as stumbling blocks. We, as a Christian or a Christ-following body, need to recognize that. And that's what I'm trying to do through Conscious Counseling 101 and this series on the New Testament. And I hope that if you've watched all three, you're starting to get that. Because I'm not going to go further, because there is more to do, but you can do that on your own with this understanding that is clearly laid out in Jesus' teachings. And again, I say, I don't know this. I have faith in Jesus' teachings. I think I've followed him and kept his commands, and so therefore I feel as though what I'm seeing is me knowing him like he promised. Then I take as a servant, and I say, this is what I'm seeing as a servant in my life. This is what my studies are bringing to me. I say, don't listen to me. Just take a look at it and see if you're seeing that too. If you're going to see that too, and the Word shows you this, and the Holy Spirit shows this to you, then I will have been given the lowly position of being a servant. And what more is there? What more is there? That's good enough. What more can you do than say, I've done my life purpose, I've served? What more can you do? Let's go to one last thing. I forget what it is here, but let's look at it. 7:2. Oh, I'm sorry. I took the wrong one there. I said 1 Corinthians. I said 2 Corinthians. I was looking at 1 Corinthians. I thought it looked foreign when I wrote it down. But that again is still worthy to talk about. Let's go back over to the 2 Corinthians and get these last two verses. I'm glad that I made that little error there, because it brings up anything. I go like this. Let's talk about that. And if I'm following Jesus, I should be able to talk about that. Or if a person comes to me from anywhere and say, what do you think about this? I should be able to talk about that. And I always say, ask me anything. I have a video on here that there are 5 things I don't know. Ask me anything but those 5 things, and I can give you a biblical answer. I've got it narrowed down to just a few areas that I can't give a biblical answer in Jesus' teachings. And I get that way because he makes it so simple. And that's why I always say, again, like Paul says, don't follow me, go to that first. If you do, you'll gain that ability to have worldly knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom really is the better word than knowledge, because knowledge is fleeting. But wisdom comes from understanding of knowledge, understanding the divine purpose that has been given to us, and implementing knowledge to positive effect. So we're going to go to 2 Corinthians 3:6. Who also hath made us able ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. So really, it is really going to not lock down to the words, but it's going to lighten up and give the person that isn't locked and bound by the words, but of the Spirit, to use the words properly without the stumbling block. But they can be dangerous. But the person that's of the Spirit can do it. You can hold a serpent, a deadly serpent. And I say to you, if you're not worthy, you can't hold these words without being bitten like a deadly serpent, just like you couldn't touch or go near the Ark of the Covenant if you weren't prepared as God had asked. Same thing. Old, New Testament, Jesus the cornerstone. Same thing here. Of the Spirit. For the letter killeth, the dead word, not the living word. but the Spirit. But the Spirit giveth the light. I had a Bible study with some people that I knew in Orlando, and they finally cut the courses and said, I'm not going to do this with you anymore because you're unteachable. And that's because I said to them, you're trying to get your church, which many people think it's a cult, to say it's got to be this way. This isn't the way Jesus works. What you're doing is you're lessening the Holy Spirit, you're corrupting the living word, and you're making it a dead word. It only can be this way, no other way. This is not what Jesus teaches. And that's why I'm not teachable, because again, I'm not putting my faith in your teachings, I'm putting my faith in Jesus' teachings. And I'm sharing those teachings, and when I do, and I project it in your face, you ultimately declare me unteachable. Why? Because it's not me. You don't see but me, but you don't see the He in me because you don't know the He, because you have made the words dead like the letter rather than the Spirit. And that's why you can't see. And the final one is 2 Corinthians 7:14. For if I have boasted anything to him of you, I am not ashamed, but as we spake all things to you in truth, even so our boasting, which I made before Titus, is found a truth. Okay, I get on Paul sometimes about his boasting. But he's correct. If he's not a stumbling block, but a tool of God, that through Jesus can be used to bring people to him, then yes, he's right. None of the things he's saying are off or boasting, but they are of exactly that. The problem is, if you judge yourself able to come and do this without the divine light in your life, an understanding of the living word through Jesus' teachings, through the cornerstone and the Holy Spirit, you're going to fall on these things. You're going to use them for your own methods, and you're going to ultimately become judgmental and make the word dead, so that you can make it anything you want in the world today to gain what you want in this world and still call yourself of God. To gain prosperity doctrine and say it's because of blessings, like the Jews did when they were the chosen people. To twist the words around and make something like that happen. To believe that your leaders can be as corrupt as they are today and you can still vote for them. Why? Because they somehow are the closer one to God and allow for babies to not be aborted. It's a shame that babies are aborted, but people make those decisions. And if you think the corruption that we have today is worthy of having even that one good thing brought about, then you're saying God's not in control. You're saying God can't place ideas in the minds of men and lift them. You're saying that God can't make sure that a soul that would have been his doesn't remain his, even if it's not born. You're a humanist if you do those things. You deaden the word. Even Paul tells us not to do that. But it's not of the letter, it's of the Spirit. This is Paul Roberts, Conscious Counseling 101. It's been nice talking with you about this. Let me know what you get out of this. Let me know if you'd like to talk about anything else. But I'm going to go back to my helping people with the things they want to be helped with, and sometimes expounding on different things that come to me in my life, but basically trying to find new ways to get a bigger audience that needs to be helped, to put practical tools in their life that can help them get past things. Because let's face it, if you can't get past the problems in your life, how are you going to go to these bigger things that we're talking about, right? How are you going to get that heightened conscious if you can't even get past the regular things that hold you back in your life? So I like to focus on that with Conscious Counseling 101. But rest assured, folks, all this other stuff that I'm talking about here is behind and underneath and holding up all that. The foundation is the rock, and the rock is through Jesus' teachings.